Introduction. What are we fighting for? They were a couple who seemed perfectly matched in every regard. A young land use lawyer and a media rights specialist who had both transplanted from the Midwest to Seattle. Busy, ambitious, and deeply fond of packing their leisure time with spontaneous adventures, they spent their early days driving to Vancouver for late-night sushi or camping in the mountains. Their lives were a seamless blend of hard work and shared exploration until a single point of contention arose. She wanted a puppy, and he did not. A year later, the puppy had grown into a happy dog, but the marriage had disintegrated into divorce. They vacated the home they had returned to on their wedding night, shaking confetti from their clothes, and divided their possessions, with her taking the dog and him taking his leave. The dissolution of their union seemed to hinge on a triviality. Yet the conflict over the dog was merely the surface manifestation of a much deeper, unarticulated struggle over values, dreams, and the fundamental vision of their shared life. The fight began with practical disagreements about responsibility and money, but it quickly spiraled as external pressures mounted. His job required frequent travel, leaving her lonely in a house that felt too empty, while he felt his desire for freedom and adventure was being curtailed by a commitment he never wanted. They became trapped in a loop of unresolved argument, digging into their respective foxholes and lobbing accusations. The conflict reached its nadir with a small but symbolic act of protest by the puppy beneath the husband's desk, a mess that neither partner would clean up, as doing so would signify defeat. This standoff resulted in a calcified remnant of their discord, a physical manifestation of the mummified dog poop that represented the stagnation of their relationship. While it is easy to dismiss the breakup as a foolish tragedy over a pet, the reality is that the puppy symbolized their hidden agendas, his need for autonomy and her need for a family. Because they never uncovered these deeper truths or learned to communicate about them, their fights became destructive, eventually splintering the relationship beyond repair. This story serves as a universal caution because every couple eventually encounters disagreements that threaten to snowball into insurmountable blockages. The necessity of navigating these conflicts has become even more urgent in recent years, as the world has subjected relationships to unprecedented levels of stress. The COVID-19 pandemic turned homes into pressure cookers, dissolving the boundaries between work and life, and forcing partners to confront their differences in financing, childcare, and safety within a confined space. For many, the home ceased to be a refuge and became a crucible where hairline fractures deepened into painful cracks. While couples who were already thriving largely weathered the storm, those with existing fault lines found their relationships pushed to the breaking point, leading to rising rates of domestic violence, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. Whether in a global crisis or the normal rhythms of life, the way partners manage conflict determines the viability of their union. However, the solution is not to eliminate conflict entirely, for a relationship without friction is often a relationship without intimacy. Another couple, who prided themselves on never fighting, illustrated the dangers of avoidance. By skirting hot-button issues to spare feelings, they maintained a polite veneer, but drifted miles apart emotionally. When they finally took stock of their relationship in a therapy setting, they realized they knew little about each other's current inner lives. The husband's silent resentment over his wife's social habits surfaced only when forced, revealing that their peace was actually a hollow distance. Conflict, when engaged correctly, is a form of connection. It is the mechanism by which partners bridge their differences and understand who they are becoming. The tragedy is that few people are taught how to fight effectively, leaving them to rely on inherited behaviors from childhood or past relationships that often lead to criticism, defensiveness, and rapid, insincere apologies that bury the actual issues. The science of love, developed over 5 decades of research in the Love Lab, offers a different path. By observing thousands of couples, monitoring everything from their heart rates to the split-second nuances of their facial expressions, researchers have identified the specific behaviors that distinguish the masters of relationships from the disasters. They found that the first 3 minutes of an argument can predict the relationship's status 6 years later, and that a specific ratio of positive to negative interactions is essential for longevity. Crucially, they discovered that 69% of relationship problems are perpetual, stemming from fundamental differences in personality and belief that will never disappear. The goal, therefore, is not to solve every problem, but to navigate these perpetual conflicts without descending into gridlock or the destructive behaviors known as the four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness. Even the happiest couples fight, but they do so with a skill set that allows for collaboration and repair. The ultimate objective of conflict is to create something better for both partners, transforming the friction of disagreement into a deeper understanding of the subterranean worlds within each person. Humans are vast and complex, containing depths that often leak out only during the heat of an argument. By learning to fight with kindness and curiosity rather than defensiveness, couples can uncover the hidden needs and dreams that drive their disputes. This approach turns conflict into a vehicle for intimacy rather than a wedge of separation. As a 4-year-old child once profoundly observed, if parents are fighting all the time, there are no rainbows in the house. The storm is inevitable, but it is only by navigating through it with skill and compassion that a couple can reach the beauty on the other side. This introduction establishes the critical premise that conflict is an unavoidable and potentially constructive element of intimacy, shifting the reader's focus from avoiding arguments to mastering them. Chapter 1. The scene opens on a young couple sitting propped against crisp white pillows, their laptop camera recording them as they attempt to discuss their day. At first, the atmosphere is warm, marked by awkward laughter and the synchronized fumbling of conversation starters, but the mood shifts with startling speed. As the woman mentions telling her parents they could stay in the bedroom for the weekend, relegating the couple to the couch, the man's demeanor stiffens. In less than a minute, a casual chat devolves into a heated skirmish. He complains about his sleep. She dismisses his comfort. He claims he wants to be at his best for her parents. She accuses him of never being at his best anyway. Eye rolls, sarcasm, and accusations fly until the interaction disintegrates completely. He shouts that he was trying to be funny. She accuses him of malice. The encounter ends in silence, with both partners turning away, exhausted and defeated, staring in opposite directions. Watching this intimate collapse is not just a therapist, but an advanced AI system designed to assist couples in the privacy of their own homes. Built upon decades of research from the Love Lab, this technology observes the subtle architecture of conflict, tracking heart rates via video feed and coding emotions second by second. In this specific instance, the AI detects a plummeting trust metric and a spike in physiological arousal, particularly in the husband, whose heart rate surges to 107 beats per minute. This digital observer is applying the principles of the Specific Effect Coding System, or SPAF, a method originally developed by Gottman to map the intricate dance of emotion in relationships. While the field of psychology once deemed the study of couples too chaotic to yield scientific patterns, rigorous observation proved that interactions between partners are remarkably stable and predictive. By analyzing sequences of conflict, researchers, and now algorithms, can predict the future of a relationship with over 90% accuracy. The fight witnessed on the bed is described as a textbook example of relationship deterioration because it encapsulates the most destructive features of conflict. It erupts over a trivial logistics issue, but escalates almost instantly, devoid of any genuine listening. The dialogue is saturated with the four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, which are the primary predictors of relationship dissolution. The couple demonstrates a complete lack of repair attempts. Instead of de-escalating, they kitchen sink the argument, dragging in past grievances about birthdays and phone calls. Crucially, the ratio of positive to negative interactions, which needs to be at least 5-to-1 for a relationship to thrive, hits 0. The interaction is entirely negative, driven by physiological flooding, a state where the nervous system is so overwhelmed that rational engagement becomes impossible, leading to the husband's eventual shutdown. However, the inevitability of conflict is rooted in biology and evolution. we are often drawn to partners who are vastly different from us, a phenomenon supported by the sweaty t-shirt study, which found that women are biologically attracted to the scent of men with major histocompatibility complex MHC genes different from their own. This drive for genetic diversity creates a stronger immune system for potential offspring, but ensures that we pair with people who have opposing personalities and preferences. These differences, initially magnetic, often become perpetual sources of friction. When the novelty fades, spontaneity looks like irresponsibility, and sociability looks like flirtation. Furthermore, life stressors, such as the arrival of a child or the exhaustion of a workday, exacerbate these tensions. Research on police couples demonstrated that on high-stress days, partners were more physically aroused and prone to negative interactions, proving that the residue of the outside world seeps toxically into the relationship. Despite the unpleasantness of such fights, the data reveals a counterintuitive truth. Anger itself is not the enemy. Early in his research, Gottman expected to find that anger was dangerous, and that frequent fighting in a marriage's infancy signaled doom. The results showed the opposite. Couples who fought early on often ended up with stronger relationships over time, particularly when the conflict was driven by women raising issues. This wife-negative effect was actually a sign of health, indicating a refusal to suppress needs. Conversely, the low-conflict couples who avoided disagreements were often more fragile, their silence masking a drift toward emotional detachment. Modern neuroscience supports this rehabilitation of anger. While emotions like fear and sadness trigger activity in the right frontal brain and lead to withdrawal, anger triggers the left frontal brain, the same area associated with joy and curiosity. Anger is classified as an approach emotion. It is a biological signal urging an individual to engage, to bridge a gap, and to address a frustrated goal. The danger lies not in the anger itself, but in how it is delivered. When anger is expressed without the toxicity of contempt or criticism, it serves as a vital information channel. It highlights what matters and drives partners toward necessary, albeit difficult, conversations. Ultimately, we fight because a relationship is the collision of two distinct brains, each with its own history, desires, and survival instincts. The tension between the I and the we is the fundamental struggle of intimacy. Humans have a deep need for autonomy, yet survival has always depended on cooperation and the collective. In a marriage, this evolutionary paradox plays out in thousands of daily micro-decisions, from household chores to career priorities. Conflict is the mechanism by which we negotiate this tension. It is not a sign of failure, but the royal road to understanding, a necessary friction that, when managed with curiosity rather than judgment, sharpens the ability to love. The challenge is not to eliminate fighting, but to understand the unspoken conflict culture each partner brings to the table, and to learn how to navigate the inevitable discord without destroying the bond. Chapter 2. Why we fight the way we fight. If the biological imperative of two distinct brains trying to coexist explains the inevitability of conflict, the specific manner in which that conflict unfolds is defined by something else entirely, our conflict culture. Many couples arrive at a breaking point not because of the specific topics they argue about, whether it is where to eat dinner or whether to have a child via surrogate, but because they possess fundamentally divergent beliefs about what a fight should look like. Consider Tyler and Noah, a couple who share a life of overlapping interests in art and food, but crumble the moment disagreement strikes. Tyler, seeking engagement, raises his voice to emphasize his points. Noah, viewing this intensity as an attack, shuts down and flees the room. To Tyler, Noah is cold and uncaring. To Noah, Tyler is impossible to communicate with. Their struggle is not one of content, but of style. A clash of invisible rules they each inherited from their pasts and now wield, often unconsciously, against one another. Research into the architecture of relationships identifies 3 primary conflict styles that can exist within a healthy partnership: avoiding, validating, and volatile. These are not rigid labels, but rather points on a spectrum. Conflict-avoidant couples prioritize stability and peace, often minimizing their disagreements to preserve the status quo. They may compartmentalize their lives into separate spheres of influence to reduce friction, or simply express their feelings once and move on, preferring not to rock the boat. Validating couples, by contrast, are the polite collaborators of the relationship world. They view conflict as a problem to be solved through logic and compromise, often displaying a calmness that resembles a business negotiation. They listen, they empathize, and they are willing to sacrifice their own position to maintain equilibrium. Then there are the volatile couples, who erupt with passion and intensity. For them, a raised voice is not a sign of failure, but a form of connection. They debate, interrupt, and verbally wrestle, often mixing high-volume disagreement with humor and affection, much like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, a charismatic pair from early longitudinal studies who relished their explosive yet fundamentally affectionate spats. For decades, the psychological establishment believed that the validating style was the only path to marital success, a theory popularized by biologist Harold Rausch in the 1960s. Rausch argued that avoiders were too distant and volatiles too dangerous, leaving validators as the Goldilocks ideal. However, when the more sophisticated specific affect coding system was applied to the data, a startling truth emerged. Rausch was wrong. All three styles, avoidant, validating, and volatile, have an equal statistical shot at long-term happiness, provided they maintain the magic ratio. Success does not depend on how a couple fights, but on the balance of positive to negative interactions during those fights. As long as there are 5 positive interactions, a smile, a nod, a joke, a moment of empathy, for every negative one, the relationship can thrive. This ratio serves as a buffer, a mathematical safeguard that prevents the inevitable friction of partnership from grinding the bond down to nothing. When this ratio collapses, however, any style can degrade into toxicity. This is where the hostile and hostile detached couples reside. Unlike healthy volatiles, hostile couples fight with heat, but without humor or affection. Their interactions are laced with the corrosive elements of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. A stark example involved a couple named Bill and Bobby. Their dynamic had curdled into such hostility that Bobby would record Bill's outbursts to shame him. The nadir of their conflict involved a birthday gift of gourmet peanuts, which Bobby was allergic to, leading to a retaliatory act of spreading the allergens in his bed. This is the result of a broken ratio, 0 positivity, only attack. Even more desolate is the hostile detached couple, who have ceased fighting altogether, surrendering to a cold war of attrition where loneliness and indifference replace engagement. In these cases, the bridge of conflict has burned down, leaving a vast no-man's land between partners. The challenge deepens when partners possess mismatched conflict styles, creating a meta-emotion mismatch, a fundamental disagreement about how feelings should be expressed. This is a clash of emotional philosophies. An avoidant partner paired with a volatile one faces the steepest climb. The volatile partner often interprets the avoider's withdrawal as rejection, while the avoider views the volatile partner's intensity as aggression. This dynamic is frequently exacerbated by the opposites attract phenomenon, where the very energy that once intrigued them becomes the source of their greatest pain. For instance, a husband might tease his wife to spark a playful debate, only to find she retreats in hurt silence, creating a cycle where his pursuit for connection feels to her like an assault. Similarly, a mismatch between a validator and a volatile partner can lead to the validator feeling flooded by the other's passion, while the volatile partner feels patronized by the validator's calm logic. These mismatches often manifest most acutely during the persuasion phase of a fight. Every conflict follows a structure: building an agenda, attempting persuasion, and reaching compromise. Volatile fighters rush the stage, leaping almost immediately into persuasion and debate. Avoiders, conversely, view persuasion as a dangerous sinkhole and try to skip it entirely. Validators approach it methodically, but often rush toward compromise too early to avoid unpleasantness. When a couple cannot agree on the rules of engagement, when one wants to dig in and the other wants to opt out, they stop hearing each other. The conversation becomes a collective monologue, like talking into a dead walkie-talkie. Crucially, these styles are not immutable destiny. They are often ruts in wet cement carved by childhood environments, whether one grew up in a home where dinner was a debating society or a home where silence reigned. But they can be reshaped. With mindfulness, a volatile partner can learn to downshift. With courage, an avoidant partner can learn to stay in the room. The goal is not necessarily to change one's fundamental nature, but to stretch toward the partner's needs. Even the authors, John and Julie, admit to a volatile default, rooted in a cultural tradition where argument is a form of love. Early in their marriage, this volatility nearly derailed them during a public dinner, where a critique of table manners spiraled toward contempt. The situation was salvaged not by calming down, but by leaning into the healthy, volatile strength of humor, John theatrically feigning a gunshot wound to the chest, which broke the tension and restored the connection. Understanding these styles and the origins of our conflict cultures is the prerequisite for the work ahead. It allows couples to stop judging the way they fight and start understanding the intent behind it, which is rarely malevolent. By recognizing that a partner's withdrawal is a defense mechanism, not an act of uncaring, or that a partner's shouting is a plea for engagement, not an act of war, couples can bridge the gap. This awareness creates a safe enough space to move beyond the style of the argument and finally address what lies beneath, the actual issues that drive the conflict. What we fight about. The descent from the initial ecstasy of a relationship to a state of walking on eggshells is often baffling to the couples experiencing it. Partners who once felt an effortless alignment find themselves possessing a negative superpower, the ability to fight about absolutely anything. A couple might pause in the middle of a vicious, name-calling brawl only to realize the spark was something as inconsequential as whether the forks in the dishwasher should point up or down. This phenomenon begs the question that researchers are asked constantly by clients, television hosts, and friends alike. What is the number one thing couples fight about? The answer is counterintuitive. The number one thing couples fight about is nothing. This nothing is a shapeshifter taking the form of cold pizza, a potted blueberry bush, or a bottle of Chardonnay. In one scenario, a wife's irritation over pizza boxes left on the counter is met with her husband's defensive sarcasm. The fight isn't about the pizza, but about a perceived lack of consideration and the coldness of the interaction. In another, a husband's pragmatic desire to plant a bush in the ground clashes with his wife's desire to keep it in a pot. The explosion of tears that follows isn't about horticulture, but about the terrifying permanence of a mortgage and the fear that their financial future is precarious. In yet another, a disagreement over a bottle of wine for a dinner party spirals into a storm-out because one partner feels his taste, and by extension his worth, is being dismissed by the other in favor of pleasing a judgmental parent. When the surface topic seems trivial, yet the reaction is volcanic, there is always subterranean fuel igniting the blast. These hidden drivers usually fall into three categories: values, unrecognized needs, and hidden dreams. We fight about what it means to be a family, about a lack of romance or play, or about deep-seated purposes and aspirations that feel threatened. Recognizing that a fight about cold pizza is actually a fight about a longing for appreciation requires a profound shift in perspective, one that is difficult to achieve when the adrenaline of conflict takes over. The foundation for managing these flare-ups lies in the small, mundane moments of daily life, specifically in what are known as bids for connection. A bid is any attempt, a comment, a gesture, a sigh, a shared meme, to secure a partner's attention. The Love Lab studies revealed that the way partners respond to these bids is the single greatest predictor of relationship health. Partners can turn toward, turn away, or turn against. Masters of relationships turn toward their partner's bids 86% of the time, while disasters manage only 30%. Turning toward is not just a nicety, it is a deposit into an emotional bank account. When this account is full, couples possess a reservoir of goodwill that buffers them against conflict, allowing them to give each other the benefit of the doubt. When the account is in the red, even neutral interactions are viewed through a negative lens, and the four horsemen, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, ride in almost immediately. Unfortunately, because emotional availability often mismatches, Leaving connection to chance results in missed opportunities. Turning toward requires intentionality. Understanding the nature of the conflict itself is equally vital. Research indicates that 69% of all relationship conflicts are perpetual. These are the problems that never go away, rooted in fundamental differences in personality, lifestyle, and values, like an introvert wanting to stay home versus an extrovert wanting to party. Choosing a partner is essentially choosing a set of perpetual problems to manage for life. The goal is not to solve these issues, as they are unsolvable, but to navigate them with humor and acceptance. The remaining 31% are solvable problems, situational issues that can be fixed. However, whether a problem is solvable or perpetual, the mechanism of damage is the same: the dismissal of negative emotions. When we invalidate a partner's feelings, the conflict escalates, regardless of the topic. When perpetual problems are mishandled, they calcify into gridlock. Gridlock is a painful state of stagnation where affection vanishes and partners feel rejected and polarized. It feels like a finger trap. The more each person pulls toward their own position, the tighter the entrapment becomes. Gridlock usually signifies that a life dream is being blocked. A fight about a job offer in a new city, for instance, might surface as a logistical debate about money, but deeply it may be a clash between one partner's dream of professional validation and the other's dream of community and stability. Unlocking gridlock requires moving beneath the surface issue to expose and honor these unfulfilled dreams. While most gridlocked conflicts can be navigated, there are specific deal breakers that signal the potential end of a road. Abuse, particularly characterological violence, where one partner seeks to dominate and control the other, is a clear exit sign. Similarly, a refusal to seek help for addiction often makes a healthy relationship impossible. Finally, deeply divergent dreams regarding children, such as one partner's absolute need to be a parent versus the other's absolute need to remain child-free, can lead to an impasse where the only compassionate resolution is to part ways, as John experienced in his first marriage. Beyond these specific deal breakers, couples are often tripped up by pervasive myths about conflict. Many believe that finding a solution to the current fight will bring eternal peace, or that the presence of conflict itself indicates a failed relationship. In reality, conflict is unavoidable, and most of it is managed, not solved. We often operate under the false assumption that one reality must be right and the other wrong, or that men are logical while women are emotional, a stereotype debunked by research showing logic and emotion are intertwined and gender-neutral. Others mistakenly believe negative emotions like anger are inherently bad, or that they can choose not to be hurt by a partner's words. Perhaps most damaging are the beliefs that one must perfectly love oneself before loving another, or that having needs requires justification. Humans are pack animals built for interdependence. Needing a partner is not a weakness, but a survival mechanism. Dispelling these myths clears the debris, allowing couples to stop fighting the wrong way and start fighting right. Conflict need not be a sign of doom. It can be a tool for understanding. With the knowledge that most fights are about nothing and everything all at once, and that the emotional bank account dictates the weather of the relationship, partners can prepare to move from the theory of conflict into the practical mechanics of navigating it. Learning how to speak so they can be heard, and how to listen so they can understand. Chapter 4. Fight Number 1. The Bomb Drop. The crisis begins on the edge of a cliff in Sedona, Arizona, where the physical danger of a hiking trail mirrors the precarious state of a marriage. Kristen and Steve, on their first adults-only vacation in a decade, find themselves surrounded by the stunning, striated red rocks of the desert, but the beauty of the landscape is quickly eclipsed by panic. Steve, a cardiologist, 15 years as Kristen Sr., freezes as the path narrows dangerously close to a 1,000-foot drop. His instinct for self-preservation overrides the adventure, and he refuses to go further. For Kristen, who has spent years accommodating the pace of their children and her husband's anxieties, this refusal feels like a betrayal. The tension snaps, and she drops a verbal bomb, attacking his character rather than addressing the situation. She calls him a coward, questioning his masculinity and accusing him of always ruining their fun. Humiliated and furious, Steve retreats down the trail, leaving Kristen alone on the ledge. The vacation is effectively over, replaced by icy silence and a fight that spirals into threats of divorce. This disastrous interaction on the trail illustrates the single most critical window in any conflict, the first 180 seconds. Research from the Love Lab demonstrates that the first 3 minutes of a disagreement predict its outcome, and often the future of the relationship itself, with 96% accuracy. If a conversation begins with a harsh startup, characterized by criticism, sarcasm, or contempt, the interaction is statistically doomed to fail. Like a pinball machine with jammed flippers, a negative opening shuts down the possibility of productive communication before the game has even begun. When these harsh startups become a pattern, they serve as a potent predictor of divorce, signaling a relationship where partners are no longer hearing one another, but are simply bracing for the next attack. The anatomy of a harsh startup usually involves 3 destructive elements: criticism, describing the partner instead of oneself, and kitchen sinking. Criticism differs from a valid complaint by attacking the partner's essential character, turning "the kitchen is messy" into "you are a slob." Furthermore, in the heat of the moment, partners often default to describing what the other person is doing wrong, using absolute terms like "you always" or "you never," rather than articulating their own internal experience. Finally, they engage in kitchen sinking, where the immediate issue becomes a Trojan horse for unleashing a horde of past resentments. The dirty dishes lead to complaints about the dry cleaning, which lead to insults about their sex life. This accumulation of grievances overwhelms the listener, making defensive retaliation the only viable option. The roots of such explosive beginnings often lie in stress, accumulated resentment, or a history of ignored bids for connection. In the case of Kristen and Steve, the context was crucial. They had met while married to other people, he the doctor, she the patient, and their relationship had formed in the excitement of illicit romance. Over time, however, they settled into rigid roles. He the hard-working provider, she the caretaker. On the cliff, their reactions were fueled by deep-seated personal histories. Kristen, raised by a melodramatic mother who once faked her own death with ketchup to get attention, had a fierce aversion to what she perceived as overreaction, interpreting Steve's genuine fear as performative weakness. Steve, conversely, was haunted by the fragility of life, a worldview shaped by witnessing a childhood friend drown and years of treating fatal heart attacks. To him, caution was an act of love and responsibility, not cowardice. To navigate out of this deadlock, the couple needed to learn a new way to speak, moving from the harsh startup to a softened startup. This approach draws on the work of Anatole Rappaport, a scholar who studied how successful diplomats navigated international conflict. Rappaport found that the most effective negotiators introduced complaints without blame, criticism, or contempt. Translated into the domestic sphere, this involves a simple but rigorous formula: stating what one feels, describing the specific situation neutrally, and clearly articulating a positive need. Instead of attacking Steve's bravery, a softened startup for Kristen would involve expressing her disappointment about the hike and her desire for shared adventure, framed as a vulnerability rather than an accusation. Implementing this change is akin to learning a foreign language. It requires overriding the instinct to attack when hurt. For Kristen and Steve, this meant reenacting their cliffside fight in the safety of a therapy office, stripping away the insults to reveal the longing underneath. It also required Steve to change his role as the listener. Just as the speaker must soften their delivery, the listener must postpone the urge to persuade or defend. Following the example of skilled diplomats, the listener's job is to hear the complaint without judgment, ask clarifying questions, and validate the partner's feelings, even if they do not agree with the partner's perspective. Only after the speaker feels truly understood can the conversation shift toward persuasion or problem-solving. This method applies across all conflict styles, though the delivery may vary. A volatile partner might express their softened needs with high energy and passion, while an avoidant partner might be more tentative. The core principle remains that honesty does not require brutality. One can be entirely truthful about their anger or disappointment, without assassinating their partner's character. By focusing on the specific situation and the positive need, what the partner can do rather than what they failed to do, couples can escape the cycle of attack and defense. While Steve and Kristen could not resolve their fundamental difference regarding risk and caution, a perpetual problem that would likely always exist between them, the softened startup allowed them to discuss it without destroying their connection, turning a potential divorce scenario into an opportunity for understanding. Chapter 5. Fight number 2. The Flood. The sensation is visceral and often terrifyingly familiar. A conversation about something mundane, like dinner plans or a checking account balance, suddenly veers into dangerous territory. The chest tightens, the palms sweat, and the heart begins to hammer against the ribs, drowning out the partner's voice. The brain feels fuzzy, hijacked by an ancient, frantic instinct to escape or attack. This physiological state is what researchers call flooding. It is the moment the nervous system detects a threat, not a tiger in the bushes, but a partner's criticism or tone, and dumps a cascade of adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. In this state of survival mode arousal, where heart rates soar past 100 beats per minute, the capacity for empathy, humor, and rational thought vanishes. The body prepares to fight or flee, leading partners to either lash out with harsh words or shut down completely, becoming a stone wall to shield themselves from the onslaught. When this physiological overwhelm becomes a pattern, it renders productive conflict impossible. In the love lab, frequent flooding was a stark predictor that a relationship was heading toward a split, simply because a flooded brain cannot process information or listen. This dynamic was painfully evident in the lives of Stan and Susan, a couple whose outwardly perfect life, he a celebrated tennis pro, she the supportive mother of twins, had been shattered by Stan's infidelity. The revelation of his affair had turned their home into a war zone. Guilt and shame drove Stan into immediate defensiveness, while Susan's shock calcified into rage. Their physiology was so reactive that they could not discuss even minor logistics without spiraling. Stan, genetically wired for a rapid fight-or-flight response, would explode or retreat instantly, feeling attacked by Susan's pain. Their conflicts escalated until they were dangerous, culminating in a terrifying evening where a glass thrown in anger shattered and physically injured Susan. They were enemies in their own home, trapped in a cycle of attack and defense. Yet, flooding is not reserved for catastrophic betrayals. It can just as easily dismantle a relationship over a morning routine. Nora and Robbie, a couple balancing high-pressure careers and teenage children, found themselves flooded over a simple miscommunication about driving the kids to school. Nora, sick and potentially fearful of COVID, needed help. Robbie, exhausted from manual labor on their home, felt unappreciated. Within seconds, a request for support turned into an indictment of character. I'm sick became, you never help. And I'm late became, you're selfish. Both partners felt the rush of righteous indignation and physical distress, turning a moment of mutual need into a regrettable incident of shouting and door slamming. In both cases, the mistake was not the conflict itself, but the failure to stop the action when the physiology took over. The antidote to flooding is counterintuitive, but non-negotiable. The interaction must stop. The moment the physical signs appear, the gritted teeth, the shallow breathing, the racing pulse, partners must call a timeout. This is not an act of avoidance, but a protective measure for the relationship. The break requires clear communication, stating the need to pause because of overwhelm, removing oneself from the visual range of the partner, and engaging in self-soothing activities that distract from the fight. Stewing in righteous anger only keeps the nervous system agitated. The goal is to let the body metabolize the stress hormones, a process that typically takes at least 20 minutes. Only when the heart rate slows and the brain comes back online can the couple return to the conversation, ensuring that the break does not mutate into a permanent silence. Once the floodwaters recede and the partners return, the objective shifts from winning the argument to solving the moment. This means prioritizing the interaction's emotional tone over resolving the specific issue. A critical component of this is the clear expression of needs. Often, resentment builds because partners expect one another to be mind readers. A musician husband, for instance, felt perpetually neglected, assuming his wife should intuitively know his emotional landscape because they had known each other since childhood. It was only when he utilized a deck of cards printed with specific needs— I need a warm greeting, I need affectionate touch— that he could articulate what he lacked. By moving from accusation to vulnerability, expressing what one feels and needs, rather than what the partner is doing wrong, the conversation stays in the green zone, where positive interactions outnumber negative ones. To help identify these feelings when words fail, individuals can rely on proprioception, the body's internal sense of itself. By noticing the physical difference between telling oneself a lie versus a truth, how the shoulders drop or the breath deepens, partners can better pinpoint whether they are truly angry, sad, or afraid. This self-knowledge is the fuel for the final and perhaps most powerful tool in managing conflict— the repair attempt. A repair is any gesture, word, or expression that prevents the conversation from sliding off the rails. It can be as simple as an apology, a moment of shared humor, or a validation of the other's perspective. In the Love Lab, researchers found that the success of a repair depends less on how it is phrased and more on the quality of the friendship underlying the conflict. If the emotional bank account is full, a clumsy repair will land. If it is empty, even an eloquent apology may be rejected. However, couples can develop shorthand for repair. Two lawyers, prone to arguing minutiae, diffuse tension by theatrically announcing, "Let the record show," whenever one realized they were being stubborn. This shared joke acted as an instant reset button, draining the tension and allowing them to return to the problem as teammates. For Nora and Robbie, mastering these tools meant their morning arguments no longer ruined their days. For Stan and Susan, the road was longer. The trauma of the affair meant that trust had to be rebuilt, brick by brick. However, by learning to take breaks when flooded and to validate each other's pain without immediately defending themselves, they began to have conversations that did not end in disaster. Stan learned to hear Susan's nightmares not as an accusation of his failure, but as an expression of her pain that required his comfort. They did not fix the betrayal in a day, but they achieved a positive interaction about a difficult subject, turning away from the dynamic of enemies and strangers. By learning to manage the flood, recognize their needs, and accept repairs, couples move from the primitive reflex of survival to the sophisticated work of connection. Chapter 6, Fight Number 3, The Shallows. Manuel and Shanae, an interracial couple married for nearly a decade, found themselves trapped in a cyclical argument that felt less like a partnership and more like an episode of The Twilight Zone. To them, the issue was clear. They were fighting about money and gift-giving. Shanae craved spontaneity and tangible tokens of affection, viewing them as essential indicators of love, while Manuel, scarred by a past bankruptcy, viewed such expenditures as reckless and threatening to their financial stability. They attempted superficial fixes, such as agreeing to limit gifts to major holidays or setting strict price caps, but these logistical solutions invariably failed. The tension culminated one Valentine's Day when Manuel, adhering strictly to their agreement, presented Shanae with a high-end blender. Her disappointment was palpable, and his frustration explosive. He felt he couldn't win, and she felt unseen, leading to shouting, tears, and a locked bathroom door. This dynamic illustrates the third major mistake couples make in conflict: skimming the surface. Manuel and Shanae were attempting to solve a problem they did not yet understand. They were stuck in the shallows, arguing over the logistics of blenders and bank accounts, while ignoring the massive submerged iceberg of meaning beneath. When couples find themselves in this state, where a conflict recycles endlessly with zero progress, leaving both partners feeling rejected and hurt, they are in gridlock. Gridlock is often accompanied by negative sentiment override, a state where partners automatically interpret neutral interactions through a lens of skepticism and hostility. The solution to gridlock is counterintuitive. Rather than pushing harder for a resolution, partners must stop, slow down, and dive deeper to uncover the dreams, history, and values fueling the conflict. The authors experienced this gridlock firsthand early in their own marriage regarding a potential purchase of a cabin on Orcas Island. For 6 years, they argued. Julie desperate for the purchase, John adamant against it. A therapist advised John to simply set a boundary and say no, advice that felt cold and disconnected from the kind of husband he wanted to be. Ignoring the professional advice, they sat down in their living room and stopped trying to persuade one another. Instead, they asked questions about the meaning behind their respective positions. Julie revealed that her childhood home had been a place of criticism and fear. The forest was her sanctuary, and the cabin represented a permanent safe haven. John then shared his history as the child of Holocaust refugees who fled Vienna with nothing but the clothes on their backs. To him, accumulating property felt like a burden and a liability in a dangerous world. Once these underlying stories were shared, the nature of the conflict transformed. The opposition vanished, replaced by compassion and a shared desire to honor each other's histories. They eventually compromised on a small, rustic cabin, understanding that the purchase was not just a financial transaction, but a negotiation of safety and identity. This breakthrough became the basis for the Dreams Within Conflict intervention. The research confirmed that beneath every gridlocked fight lies an unrequited dream or a core value. Whether the fight is about neatness, sex, or finances, the surface issue is merely a vehicle for deeper existential questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I want to live? To navigate these depths, couples must adopt specific roles. A speaker who honestly expresses feelings and needs without persuasion, and a listener who creates a safe, non-judgmental space. The listener's task is to interview the speaker, asking questions that act as a dream catcher. They inquire about the values, ethics, and beliefs driving the partner's position, ask if there is a childhood history or story connected to it, and probe for the ideal dream or underlying goal. This process expands the conversation, moving it away from the frantic back and forth of debate and into a realm of discovery. For those who struggle to identify their own underlying dreams, taking time for reflection, looking through old photos, thinking about family legacies, or examining past traumas can help bring these hidden motivations to light. Returning to Manuel and Shanae, the Dreams Within Conflict framework revealed that their fight had nothing to do with the price of a blender. Shanae shared that as a child of an absent father and an addicted mother, she rarely received gifts. When her aunt gave her mere socks for Christmas while spoiling her own children, Shanae learned that gifts symbolized worthiness. She was starved for a tangible sign that she mattered. Manuel's history was the inverse. Raised by abusive parents, the only person who gave him gifts was a godmother, who later abandoned him when he fell into trouble. To him, gifts were a prelude to manipulation and betrayal. Understanding this, Manuel realized his resistance wasn't about frugality, but about a defense mechanism against being used. Shanae realized his refusal wasn't a rejection of her, but a trauma response. This revelation did not magically erase their differences. The friction between Shanae's need for symbolic love and Manuel's wariness of manipulation would remain a perpetual issue to be managed. However, the toxicity was drained from the interaction. In a subsequent argument over Manuel bringing home a box of nails instead of a romantic surprise, the conversation shifted. Instead of spiraling into accusations of selfishness, they were able to joke about their triggers. Shanae could playfully ask if she could manipulate him into buying her a chocolate bar, and Manuel could laugh and agree, knowing that the purchase wouldn't lead to financial ruin or emotional abandonment. The lesson is that understanding must precede resolution. Often couples fear that their dreams are incompatible. One wants to climb Mount Everest, the other wants to sit on a couch and write equations. But 87% of the time, gridlocked issues can be navigated once the underlying meanings are exposed. Even monumental decisions, like a spouse suddenly quitting a job to start a motocross track, can be weathered if the couple understands the life dream driving the change. By stepping out of the shallows and exploring the profound personal philosophies that govern their lives, partners can turn their worst conflicts into their greatest opportunities for intimacy, proving that while they may not always agree, they can always strive to know one another. Couples instinctively drift into this adversarial mindset during conflict. Whether the dispute concerns who should wash the dishes after dinner, whether to send the children to summer camp, or if a family should relocate for a job, partners often perceive these situations as win or lose gambits. They dig into their positions, armed with logic and self-righteousness, believing that if they simply explain their perspective clearly enough, the other will capitulate. The result is a scoreboard flashing in red, where winning an argument creates a loser on the other side of the bed, ultimately eroding the partnership itself. This dynamic was vividly illustrated by Vince and Jenny, a couple in their 60s, from Bellingham, Washington, who found themselves in a heartbreaking standoff on the verge of retirement. For decades, they had worked hard and raised children, believing they were moving toward a shared future, only to discover their dreams were polar opposites. Vince, a commercial fisherman tired of cold, clunky trawlers, dreamed of buying a sailboat and traveling the world. Jenny dreamed of returning to her ancestral roots in Iowa to live in a farmhouse that had been in her family for generations. There is no ocean in Iowa, and there is no farm on the high seas. By the time they sought help, their relationship was hanging by a thread, their conversations laced with sarcasm and accusations of selfishness. They were trapped in a classic zero-sum game. For one to live their dream, the other had to let theirs die. The consequences of such gridlock are not merely emotional, but physical. In a 20-year longitudinal study, researchers utilized a rating dial to track how couples perceive their interactions moment by moment. Some couples operated with a cooperative dynamic, where a positive moment for one was shared by the other. Others, the zero-sum couples, showed an inverse relationship. When one felt good, the other felt bad. The long-term fallout of this dynamic was shocking. When researchers attempted to follow up years later, they discovered that 58% of the husbands in zero-sum marriages had passed away, compared to only 20% in collaborative unions. The physiological toll of viewing one's partner as an adversary, manifested in chronically elevated heart rates and stress hormones, was literally lethal. Conversely, trust and cooperation acted as a protective buffer, slowing blood flow and calming the nervous system. Escaping this trap requires a shift from competing to yielding to win, a philosophy borrowed from the martial art of Aikido. Instead of blocking an opponent's energy, the practitioner moves with it to achieve balance. In relationships, this translates to accepting influence. Research indicates that the most successful couples are those who allow their partners to sway their decisions and perspectives. This can be particularly challenging in heterosexual relationships, where cultural conditioning often equates masculinity with dominance and rigidity. Data shows that men who refuse to share power have an 81% probability of divorce. In contrast, same-sex couples often navigate this terrain with greater ease, displaying less defensiveness and a higher capacity for shared humor and influence, likely because they are less bound by traditional gender scripts that demand one partner dominate the other. True strength in a relationship is found not in stubbornness, but in the capacity to be a protector of the partner's humanity and dreams. This form of protection redefines traditional roles. It might look like a husband taking over night feeds so his wife can rest and maintain her milk supply, or learning to braid a daughter's hair so his wife can pursue a mountaineering dream. When a partner becomes immovable, like a rock in the middle of a trail, they lose all actual influence, because the other person simply learns to work around them. To hold power in a relationship, one must be movable. To practice this, couples can engage in low-stakes negotiations, such as the island survival game, where they must agree on a list of 10 essential items to salvage from a shipwreck. If the exercise descends into domination or withdrawal, it serves as a diagnostic tool for the power dynamics plaguing their real-life conflicts. The necessity of cooperative gain was underscored by a scene the authors witnessed while traveling in the Arctic Circle. Off the coast of Norway, a couple in a tandem kayak found themselves jammed onto a shelf of ice. Instead of working together, they devolved into bickering and blame, each refusing to listen to the other's strategy for getting unstuck. Because neither would yield or accept influence, they remained stranded until the entire group had to rescue them. This is the fate of the zero-sum couple. In their desperate need to be right, they stay stuck on the rocks. To get moving again, couples must embrace the bagel method, an intervention designed to facilitate compromise without sacrificing core values. The bagel method asks partners to visualize a bagel, separating the issue into an inner circle, the whole, and an outer circle, the dough. The inner circle represents the non-negotiable core needs, the values and identity-level dreams that cannot be surrendered without losing oneself. The outer circle represents areas of flexibility, the who, what, where, and when of how those dreams might be realized. When Vince and Jenny applied this to their retirement standoff, they realized that while their core dreams, sailing for him, the family legacy of the farm for her, were inflexible, the logistics were not. They discovered they could move to the farm but spend winters sailing, or take intensive sailing courses while living in Iowa. By validating each other's core needs and flexing on the details, they transformed a dead-end conflict into a hybrid life that honored both visions. This method of distinguishing between the essential and the flexible allows couples to navigate even the most complex logistical and cultural disagreements. One couple, divided between living in Geneva or Lagos due to career and family obligations, utilized this framework to create a non-traditional arrangement where they split their time between continents, satisfying his duty to his parents and her need for her son's educational support. Of course, not every standoff can be solved. If core dreams are mutually exclusive, such as the desire for children, the relationship may naturally reach its end. However, in most cases, what feels like an impasse is actually a failure of imagination and trust. By moving toward the Nash equilibrium, a state where both players maximize their payoff by considering the other's strategy, partners stop playing to win and start thinking for two. This shift from an adversarial stance to a collaborative one builds the trust and commitment necessary to weather future storms, turning potential standoffs into opportunities for mutual gain. Chapter 8. Fight number 5, The Chasm in the Room. During the claustrophobic pressure cooker of the early COVID-19 pandemic, Molly and Selena believed they were surviving the stress better than most, until a logistical disagreement over remote schooling shattered their illusion of stability. What began as a request for time to work spiraled into a whispered, venomous argument behind a closed office door, culminating in Molly lashing out with a devastating comment about Selena's status as a non-biological parent. Although they exchanged quick apologies that evening, the wound remained infected. For days and weeks afterward, they found themselves trapped in a daisy chain of conflict, relitigating the details of who started it and who was more wronged, unable to escape the gravity of the initial hurt. They were stuck in a common trap, the belief that they could simply move on without truly processing the regrettable incident, leaving a chasm of unresolved resentment between them. The psychological mechanism that prevents couples from simply moving on is known as the Zeigarnik effect, named after a psychologist who observed that waiters could perfectly recall complex orders only until they were delivered, after which the memory vanished. The human brain retains unfinished business with startling clarity. In relationships, an unprocessed fight remains undelivered, staying active in memory where it festers and distorts over time. Because memory is malleable and self-serving, each partner's recollection drifts further toward their own victimhood, turning a specific incident into a generalized narrative of the partner's villainy. Without a deliberate effort to process these events, couples are left walking with a metaphorical pebble in their shoe, limping through their interactions, while intimacy erodes. To bridge this gap, partners must engage in a specific form of repair conversation, a method the authors developed after a significant blowout of their own. The incident began with a phone call from their daughter, Mariah, who was away at college. While Julie heard signs of illness and felt a maternal compulsion to ensure her daughter's health, triggered by a childhood trauma involving undiagnosed polio, John heard his wife potentially stifling their daughter's newfound independence. John's reaction was rooted in his own history as a bullied child, for whom college had been a liberating renaissance. He was desperate to protect that experience for his child. In the heat of the moment, however, these deeper motivations were invisible. John accused Julie of being controlling. Julie retaliated by calling him immature. He stormed out, leaving them both flooded and furious. The path back to connection required them to wait until the physiological flooding had subsided, allowing them to view the conflict from the balcony, a place of calm observation rather than active combat. They then utilized a 5-step processing blueprint. First, they shared their feelings without attributing blame, using simple descriptors like defensive or worried. Second, they took turns describing their subjective realities, validating that the other's perspective made sense even if it differed from their own. Third, and most crucially, they explored their triggers, connecting the intense emotions of the present moment to the enduring vulnerabilities of their pasts. Once they understood that the fight was not really about a phone call, but about deep-seated fears of medical neglect and social isolation, they could move to the 4th step, taking responsibility. They admitted to their own states of mind, stress, sensitivity, fatigue, that set the stage for the blow-up, and offered specific apologies. Finally, they made constructive plans for how to handle similar triggers in the future. This method proved effective even for conflicts that had lain dormant for a long time. Molly and Selena, the couple from the beginning of the chapter, used this framework a year after their explosive argument. By revisiting the incident without relitigating the facts, they uncovered the true sources of their pain: Molly's fear of professional erasure, and Selena's insecurity about her legitimacy as a mother. The process transformed a source of toxic resentment into a moment of profound understanding, proving that there is no statute of limitations on repair. Whether a fight happened yesterday or decades ago, revisiting it with the intent to understand rather than to win can drain the bitterness from the memory. Ultimately, the goal of fighting right is not to eliminate conflict, which is an inevitable byproduct of 2 distinct lives intersecting, but to change the nature of the battle. By shifting from harsh startups to gentle ones, from defensiveness to curiosity, and from silence to processing, couples can turn their friction to a forge for intimacy. As illustrated by Megan and Abdul, a couple whose relationship was nearly destroyed by the pressures of displacement and cultural adjustment, the decision to stop spiraling and start examining the roots of their discord saved their marriage. They learned, as all successful couples must, that the objective is not to solve every perpetual problem, but to navigate them with humor, acceptance, and the reassurance that they are on the same side. This journey through the mechanics of conflict reveals that the good fight is a skill, not a personality trait. It requires the discipline to describe oneself rather than attack the partner, the courage to express positive needs, and the patience to explore the dreams hidden beneath gridlocked issues. By mastering the art of repair and refusing to let wounds fester, partners can build a relationship resilient enough to weather the perpetual storms of life. The transition from seeing a partner as an enemy to seeing them as a fellow traveler with their own valid, complex inner world turns the battlefield into a common ground, where even the most difficult conversations serve to strengthen the bond rather than sever it.